WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. I want to thank you for being with us today. We're coming to you from Star Communications Channel 16, WCLN Radio. There's a summation in the Sampson Weekly newspaper, and as you know, each and every week at 2:30 on Tuesday, this program airs. There's also an uplink to YouTube 2 weeks afterwards. You can go there if you know friends or what have you want to see the show later. You want to pick up on it and go to YouTube 2 weeks after it airs here and pick that up. I'm constantly getting that kind of question, and if somebody in the other part of the country or another part of the state wants to pick it up, they can do it there as well. We've been talking a lot about ag over the past few weeks. In fact, if you live in this listening area and this viewing area, we need to talk a lot about ag, and this is one of those times that we're very fortunate to have the state veterinarian with us, and it's Dr. R. Douglas Meckus. And did I say that?
Meckus.
Meckus, Dr.
Yeah.
R. Douglas Meckus. From Apex, North Carolina. Started out there with the veterinarian business in Apex.
Right, 1976.
And time has now propelled you to going through the United States Senate, where you worked there with Senator Hagan.
Yes.
You've also done a number of activities, which really interested me in Homeland Security and working and discussing key principles of security for the livestock, poultry industry, and everything related to animals, really, not only in North Carolina, but working with other states.
Yes, that's correct.
That's critically important, but yet now you are the state person in charge of veterinary animal diseases, transmission, whatever it may be. Somehow it touches your desk. You got about 150 people that work for you.
That's correct. 150 folks. There are 4 separate groups within the veterinary division. The livestock group, the poultry group, our diagnostic laboratory system falls in the veterinary division, and our animal welfare section that oversees shelters and kennels and their operations in the state of North Carolina.
Dr. Meckus, when you look at where you've been, and obviously you know better than anybody, and where you are now, what would you say about this journey? Because you and I were just talking before we came on air. We were talking and sharing some of our memories of previous jobs. You've had quite a journey.
Well, in fact, it has been a remarkable journey. My practice career, 30 years in Apex, started with predominantly large animals, 60-some dairies, 30 of which were in Wake County at the time, horse work in 4 counties, and a small number of dogs and cats in a town of 2,000 people when I moved to Apex in 1976. Over the years, we expanded and purchased clinics in Smithfield and Dunn and Southern Pines, and built several in Cary and Fuquay-Varina. But my interest always was with the large animal side of the practice and the surgery. I did surgery for almost exclusively for the last 15 years. But in 2005, I fulfilled what had been a dream of mine, to make application for the Congressional Science Fellowship in Washington, D.C. And
that was huge.
That was. And I had no idea where this road would take me. I literally walked into the Russell Senate office building to sit down at my desk and go to work, and here almost 15 years later, I've spent 7 years in Homeland Security. I lobbied on the Hill for issues of concern for the American Veterinary Medical Association, and now, of course, the state veterinarian. And my wife and I have talked about the fact that my entire career in practice in Washington brought me to this point in life to do this job.
I think it did, and I think the nexus is when I look at a presentation you did to the House of Representatives in D.C., and a lot of it that really intrigued me is with this whole issue, not only of the number and volumes of animals we have here in North Carolina,
right,
but it's unparalleled when you look at it nationally. The volume of that and the sensitivity of that to potential terrorism is something we talked about years and years ago, but now nothing's changed there, has it?
No, there's still a perceived risk from terrorist activity associated with our animal agriculture across the country, our food safety across the country, and much of what I did in Homeland Security was focused on that terrorist threat, as well as natural disasters and other emergencies. But we push states and locals to develop a mindset of preparedness so they could respond in a timely fashion to whatever came their way, whether you're responding for a terrorist attack or a flood or an animal disease event. The response is essentially the same at the beginning. And we were fortunate to be able to work with states across the country, and particularly North Carolina. And I always took the opportunity to brag a bit about North Carolina.
Absolutely.
We have led the country in our efforts to be prepared, and part of it is associated with the storm events that come our way on a regular basis.
And I think if there's one kind of petri dish here for learning, it's particularly Eastern North Carolina as it relates to water and agriculture and swine and beef cattle and everything else. It's amazing. What I wanted to kind of move to here is, if you could, to think about that in the sense of getting folks to understand, since you have walked in the halls of the Senate, since you have been in that arena, that oftentimes we as the public only get to see maybe the senator or the House of Representatives member. We'll see that, but we don't see the massive amount of information in the background. And yet now we see and have seen on the media some things that have been spoken by some folks in the House that it's a little bit perplexing, because it seems they have not enjoyed the knowledge and the base level of ability to gain knowledge there that exists. Help us understand how that happens, and is it just sensationalism, or what's going on there?
Well, I can say, given my experience, that every member of the House, every member of the staff of the Senate has a competent staff behind them that works every day to keep those members abreast of the issues. So everything that Senator Hagel spoke on the floor, every newscast, at some point in time he'd received a one-page memo from one of his staff on just that issue and what the issues of concern were for him and for the state of Nebraska. And
it was duly vetted before it went out there.
That's right, absolutely. And I received many a one-page memo with blue marker spread all over it, and fix this, change that. So we made certain that the information that the senator had was timely, appropriate, and factual.
Has technology changed that with Facebook and Instagram and all these other ways of communication, where folks tend to just shoot their initial feeling out and not look at it from a point of research and documentation?
Absolutely. I'm not a fan of anything. I'm really not a fan of email, but I have 3 email accounts, and
you can't function without it.
Can't function without it in this day and time. And Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, frankly, I don't follow those means of communication. I prepare documents now for the commissioner, for Assistant Commissioner Joe Reardon, and again, it's a one-page memo. These are the issues of concern. We are blessed to have a wealth of information available to us through the variety of search engines that exist in the internet, but I stay with the facts, and I stay with what's relevant to the issue at hand, and try to avoid the extraneous approaches that some take on these matters.
And a lot of it to me, is validation. Oftentimes we can get in that world of hyperbole and where folks are just trying to stimulate a response or increase numbers of listeners or viewers. And I think there's a certain danger with that, because oftentimes folks will take that as factual information.
Well, that is absolutely the case, because facts seem irrelevant at times today. We know facts about animal agriculture in the state of North Carolina. We know facts about production, non-animal agriculture production, but those are discarded on a regular basis for sensationalism, for someone's personal agenda to try to move an idea that's not well supported by the facts.
the connectivity with that, with the economy, and I think rural areas are facing a lot of that. I know in the more metropolitan areas in Wake County, Greensboro, Charlotte, and those areas, growth, human beings' growth is a big issue,
Sure.
and so we're looking for their apartments, affordability, all those kinds of things. But in this part of the state, particularly the eastern part of the state, agriculture and the number of livestock members, as I would say, is a critical component for us.
That's right. Think about the $87 billion of economic value add in North Carolina from agriculture. The fact that 68% of that is associated with animal agriculture, you begin to see the importance of poultry, swine production, particularly in this part of the eastern part of the state of North Carolina.
The employability rate here and trying to sustain a low unemployment rate is directly attributed to ag or the ag industry.
Right.
When I look at the livestock industry, particularly as it relates to chickens and poultry, and we're going to talk a bit about it in a minute, a little more in depth with the disease issue, but that's a critical area for folks to understand as well. These are not things that we should just take for granted.
No, we absolutely should not. And I mean, the truth is, banking, transportation, tax base, support of schools, feed sales, equipment sales, all of those are the heartbeat of eastern North Carolina. Take agriculture away, and that goes away as well.
And that tax base, in fact, just a recent conversation with the county manager here, that's critical to the tax base of these rural counties in the eastern part of the state. Without that functionality, you know, we've got a major hit on schools and various other means of education that is often another one of those things that we kind of take for granted. We go out and do our job and we don't understand.
Right.
It all builds into the tax rate.
Right.
We're going to take our first break. And it'll be short, so we'll be back in a minute to talk some more about this. I want to transition when we come back to this whole feral swine thing that's going on now and the impact of that. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Call a friend. We're talking with Dr. Meckus, who is the veterinarian for the state, the head guy. About 150 folks work for it. Interesting background. You're going to want to hear what we're talking about when we come back.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Meckus. He is the veterinarian, the chief head guy in the state when it comes to things related to animals. Anything that squeals, walks, clucks, otherwise, or maybe whinnies, I don't know. But if it's, yeah, whinnies is good. So with that position, and again, we've got things happening in the state, and one of these programs that is Department of Ag Department does a great job with is something called feral swine. Now, feral swine, when I see that word, recently I had the animal control folks on, and they talked about feral cats.
Right.
And I was trying to wrap my head around the word feral. Help us understand what feral swine is. Why do we need a task force? And the 25th, which is the 25th of July, which is coming up here, at 6 p.m. I want to make sure I highlight this at the Sampson County Center Livestock Arena. That's 93 Agricultural Place right here in Clinton. There's going to be a listening session that's put on by the task force.
That's right. Well, the feral swine, gosh, go back to the 1500s when early explorers made their way into to North America, and they actually brought pigs with them. And interestingly enough, they would release pigs along the way so that they would populate the areas and begin to breed. And when on the return trip, there'd be plenty of critters for them to harvest and
that was a
sustain
protein
themselves.
source. Yeah.
That's right, protein source. And so obviously, over the years, that situation has changed. And today, I can tell you that, relatively speaking, numbers in the U.S. are thought to be around 8 million wild pigs running loose throughout the Southeast. They've made their way into 41 states now. over the years. And obviously some states are more burdened by feral swine than others, particularly Texas. They may have as many as 2 million feral swine in Texas.
Wow.
We don't have a good feel for numbers of feral swine in North Carolina. That's one of the reasons we've initiated this listening session, or these listening sessions, so we can hear from folks about their encounters, their experiences with feral swine in their fields, with wildlife, even the impact on wildlife, deer and birds can be significant if there are great numbers of feral swine. So, and we do all this in preparation for an effort that's really been launched through the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill. $75 million was authorized for feral swine programs for use in country in the 2018 Farm Bill. That money is distributed across 10 or 12 states that have the most significant problems with feral swine. North Carolina is considered a level 4, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, level 4 state, not so much because of numbers of feral swine, but because of our pork industry in the state of North Carolina, the commercial production of pork and the threat that feral swine bring to bear for that industry with disease transmission. The feral swine can harbor disease that can be managed in a commercial operation, but yet the threat always exists with the feral swine as long as they're in the environment. So we'll work closely, and I will say that Wildlife Services Commission, North Carolina's Wildlife Services Commission, and USDA Wildlife Services has spent some time over the last few years mapping locations of feral swine in the state of North Carolina, and so they've begun to have a pretty good idea where these are. And our proposed project, a pilot project, will be in southern Sampson County, and but again, we're in the process of developing the means by which we'll undertake this project. And the first thing we'll do is write a proposal that's due August the 19th to NRCS, the National Resource Conservation group out of USDA. And it'll be a stepwise effort. Identify the damage brought about by feral swine, and identify numbers of feral swine, and then we'll begin to move towards eradication of those feral swine. And hopefully, over a period of 3 years that the grants available to us, we'll be able to document an improvement in impact from feral swine. Now, all that said, everyone has to understand that to effectively manage feral swine, you have to depopulate 70% of them on an annual basis to control the population. And until we get to that point, we can suspect, or we can believe, that there will be continued growth of the feral swine population in the state of North Carolina.
Now, but before, and I know I will get multiple calls and probably get pinned in a corner somewhere, but some animal rights advocates. This is critically important to be able to control that environment because of what you alluded to a while ago, the spread of disease.
That's right.
And the impact of disease is so critical. We're talking a major shutdown of a chunk, $80+ billion right here in North Carolina of our economy. Right.
Well, the disease for our commercial swine operation, but I did mention the potential for disease in humans. Feral swine carry pathogens that can infect people just as well as the organisms that can infect other animals. So we always caution hunters of feral swine, and that's actually quite a sport throughout the Southeast, but that proper precautions are taken to protect any individual that's working with processing or slaughter of feral swine.
And I'm sure we've got listeners right now as we're talking about this has probably heard the word feral swine, they've heard the word eradication, they heard the word wild pigs, and they're going, what did he just say? We've got wild pigs in our, so there's a sense of like, we need to look at this because a lot of people really hadn't heard about it.
That's right. Again, this problem, frankly, has flown under the radar for a number of years because, number one, our populations have not been that high. But we're beginning to see an increase in populations. We're beginning to see agricultural damage associated with these groups of feral swine. We're beginning to have reports of impacts to wildlife. So it's time for us to take a look at that, not the least of which reasons is the threat of African swine fever to North America. You may or may not be aware of the spread of this disease throughout China, throughout the Far East, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. There may be as many as 300 million dead pigs in that part of the world, China, the Far East, and we only have 70 million pigs in all of the United States. So this is a loss of 20% of the pork in the world. It's a loss of 10 to 12% of the protein in the world, and we simply cannot afford to have that disease in our country, in North America. And there is a potential for feral swine in Europe, Eastern Europe, where the disease is endemic. Wild boars carry the disease. They're not affected by the disease, but they have the potential to spread it. And we don't want that in the United States.
How is that disease communicated between, say, a situation where somebody goes to China or goes to Eastern Europe and they come back to this country?
Right.
Can it be communicated from that person to somebody else, or has it got to be direct contact?
No, it does not have to be direct contact, and that's another reason for our concern. The virus moves about on people, it moves about on equipment, it potentially could move in animal feeds. Garbage feeding is a routine practice throughout China, throughout Eastern Europe, and that's one of the most significant contributions to the spread of the disease. Our Customs and Border Protection in the Department of Homeland Security intercepts 4,000 to 5,000 products every day that passengers try to bring into this country. And processed sausage, cured meats. It's remarkable what people pack in their suitcases. But that virus can survive in those products, and it's one of the means by which it could be introduced into this country.
Can it survive for an extended period of time, or does it have a life expectancy?
In cold weather, it can survive for months. Hot weather, like we have today, would eliminate the virus. But in cooler temperatures, in blood, in feces, in body fluids, it can survive for months.
So for people that's traveling and going out of the country and coming back, they need to really take this extremely serious.
Right.
If nothing else, if you just look at it from the financial point of view,
right.
There will be a lot of services shut down in North Carolina that has been fed by the poultry and livestock industry.
Right. When you travel abroad and return to this country, you're provided a customs card on the returning flight that asks the question, have you been to a farm? If you've been to a farm, the agricultural specialist in Homeland Security's Customs and Border Protection will hopefully, and most times they do, hopefully interview you, make a determination of the extent of a threat that might be posed by your return. They'll ask you about your shoes, they'll ask you about your clothing. They even disinfect shoes and clothing at the customs center for some folks coming back in country. But we recommend destruction of shoes or clothing before.
Just throw them away.
Throw them away before you come back into the U.S.
Because sometimes the eradication of that just simply doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Too much of a threat to our economy.
So as people are listening to what we're talking about now, the subject we're talking about, is there a particular place they can go to if they want more information, or if they've got questions, or if they want to report something that looks like to them wild hogs? It's, I don't know whether they rest, nest, or whatever, but...
Right. We have established, within the last 18 months, we've established a feral swine task force in the state of North Carolina. I don't have the number with me. We'll make that available.
Sure. That'll be good.
But there's a point of contact for that feral swine task force. It involves the Department of Agriculture, involves USDA Wildlife Services, and our Wildlife Resources Commission. So we're ready to take those calls.
We're going to take another break.
Right.
We'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Call a friend. We'll be back in a moment with Dr. Meckus.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that has a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody trying to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. I also want to remind you of the email address, weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Also, you can send us a card or a letter or whatever you want to send that's hopefully supportive of the program to Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. And that's We Should Know, Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. And I enjoy talking with you as I see you at different locations throughout the county, different events throughout the region here. I enjoy your comments and suggestions. We're talking with Dr. Meckus today.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Meckus is the head state veterinary. He's the head doc when it comes to animals, about 150 people in your department. Your background has covered everything from commissioner in Apex, North Carolina, right on through to Washington, D.C., to back to North Carolina, and it has exposed you to a lot of things that probably the average person that maybe works in state government here not only would never be exposed to, will maybe not really understand. Mm-hmm. That trajectory has pointed you here today, and we're talking about something called feral swine and what that does. But the question, as we went to break, we were looking at is these animals, and how did it come to pass? What's the importance of understanding the movement of these animals? And for example, I mean, it don't take much to look at Facebook or TV and see that people now have discovered that they want to have a pig for a pet.
Right. Well, the movement of these pigs, and we mentioned earlier, their feral swine are now found in 41 states. Mm-hmm. I like to say pigs don't move pigs, people move pigs. And that's the situation we found ourselves in. There's a culture of hunting these feral swine for sport, and many of the trophy type pigs are captured in one southern locale, moved to another, and released, and over a period of time the numbers have incrementally increased. We talked about close to 8 million feral swine in the country now. So it's part of our heritage in the South, and it's part of who we are, but by the same token, we have to get this problem under control for the reasons we've discussed earlier, for the spread of disease in our commercial pork industry, for the threat to zoonotic diseases, that is, diseases that move back and forth between animals and people. And we're going to work with our colleagues, with our cohorts in the state of North Carolina to begin to understand the importance and the impact of feral swine, and then move towards controlling that population.
And this event is coming up the July 25th, which is on Thursday, 6 to 8 at the Corporate Extension Arena there, right here in the county. This will be task force people and the whole point in that is to listen to citizen input.
That's
listen
right.
to folks maybe that are livestock growers,
Right.
what they've seen, to get a handle on where the population of these wild animals are.
That's correct. And during the early in the evening, each one of our partners in this endeavor will have a short presentation. Wildlife Resources Commission from North Carolina, Wildlife Services from USDA, NRCS from USDA. Each of them will speak to their realm of concern with regards to the impact of feral swine, and then we'll actively seek this citizen input as we go forward with the grant from the federal government to manage feral swine in a number of states throughout the country. We will actively engage with producers, pork producers, with produce producers, with row crop producers to help them manage feral swine problems that they may have in their facilities.
Is one of the first steps with this process to try to identify where the major populations are of these wild pigs?
Right. Well, we actually, that step fortunately has been taken. Wildlife Resources, Wildlife Services has a good idea of where the predominant numbers of feral swine are in the state of North Carolina. We'll be looking for individuals that have been significantly impacted by these pigs and then work to address and remediate those impacts. And ultimately NRCS will come back with dollars to try to make them whole again with regard to production and whatever other issues need to be resolved for them.
Dr. Meckus, you mentioned southern Sampson County.
Right.
Is there an identity of herds in that area more than the northern part of the county?
Well, we had to identify from what we know across the state of North Carolina an area of significant impact, and yes, that is the case for that. But in addition, it's also part of our two largest swine producing counties. So that's where we want to work to manage this impact in those areas where we have so many commercial swine and where the feral swine have had the most impact.
And the inevitable observation that somebody's going to make is, well, okay, we've got these pigs that we're growing for market. They're in the pens. There's a process. There's a feed source that comes in.
That's right.
Is any of that directly related that at some point in time some of these pigs escape and then they became feral, or was these feral animals that they come from the wild, or they originate as I'm not going to say domestic, but
well, some of them have originated as domestic, frankly, and we have a significant what's referred to as transitional swine industry in the state of North Carolina. Those are pasture-raised pigs in people's backyards, and they frequently encounter feral pigs. Obviously, feral pigs go where the food is, and if a transitional farm owner is feeding his swine in the back pasture, feral pigs will show up and enjoy that free meal. And then of course we have all the problems with interbreeding. We have problems with disease spread. That's hopefully in most of our commercial operations we have sufficient biosecurity that the feral swine or the commercial swine never interact with one another, but there are situations where that has come to pass.
Do wild pigs, I'm going to use the term wild pigs in case somebody's listening and then they miss what feral is, but I'm going to use wild pigs. Does that necessitate that there's going to be other animals, considering the food chain, that come into the picture that actually wild pigs are a food source for? And I can think of some pretty dangerous animals that could be that. Is that something we should be concerned about as well?
I'm not certain that wild pigs have any natural enemies other than man, and that's again, that's part of the problems. They can eat anything, they can survive off of next to nothing, and the greatest
predators are not there.
Predators are simply not there. These are aggressive critters, and dogs are used to hunt them upon occasion, and I've seen many reports of injuries associated with those for those dogs involved in these hunts. So they just don't have any natural enemies.
For the citizens in Bladen, Sampson, Pender, Duplin, Cumberland, let's see, Johnson, Wayne County, we got a pretty good listening audience. What should they look for? For example, like you just said, they may go out and feed their dog and the next morning discover the dog has got an issue over there and the food's gone. Yeah. Is there signs that wild pigs are dominating in your area?
Right. They're horrifically destructive. I've had reports of farmers planting corn today, going back the next day, and the entire row of corn has been rooted up, and every seed corn planted for 50 acres has been consumed by the pigs. Wow. And the soil is disrupted, the landscape is disrupted. As I say, they are, you can take a look at feral swine damage on the internet and you'll just see horrific areas of destruction that they've wrought. Graveyards in the eastern band of the Cherokee Indians have been desecrated by these pigs, and golf courses, one of their favorite places.
We got everybody's attention now.
That way, I wasn't going to say that.
I'm just saying. All right.
A little closer to Charlotte, we might be better.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. We got about 3 or 4 golf courses right here in the area. And I know some people going, wait a minute now, did you just say golf course?
Getting serious now.
Yeah, it's getting serious. So when we look at that, do they usually run in groups of 5, 6, 2, 3, 10? I mean, how big of herds are we talking about here?
Anywhere from 6 or 8 to 15 to 20, and there's a unique term, a sounder of pigs. I've never heard that term until recently, but that's how that group is characterized.
So it's kind of the thunder that comes along with them when they come in. Mm-hmm. The other thing that as you're talking about what a food source is, I know you're aware of, and of course anybody who lives in this area and is listening to their voice obviously knows as well. We got some great food sources for wild hogs, wild pigs.
Sure.
One of those is sweet potatoes.
Right.
The other is watermelon.
Yep.
All of these things are the things, and the reason I'm saying that is because I remember as a small child, that's what we used to feed pigs. This was before it became an industry. This was, when you throwed it over the fence.
Well, again, that's why garbage feeding of pigs is so successful. They can sustain themselves off nearly anything, and they do so.
So the steps that folks need to think about as they come to this event is to what they know, what they've seen, destructive issues, food source issues, and the ultimate result is going to be to, as much as possible, eradicate that industry so we can shut down the disease that is spread by it.
That's exactly the case. We want to. And ultimately, we'll continue to, as we continue to understand the feral swine, their habits, the way they move about in the environment, we'll better understand what we can do to control these ever-expanding populations.
But you got to identify where they're at and what their movement patterns are, and then try to determine that.
That's correct.
And folks, I'm going to remind you, that's July 25th. That's Thursday, 6 to 8 at the Corpus Extension Office. We're going to take another break. We'll be back in a moment. Call a friend. Stay tuned. We're coming up on our last segment here on the show. And we've got Dr. Meckus with us, who is the state veterinarian for North Carolina. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some other things going on in that whole area of meat. Well, maybe not.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Meckus, state head of the whole things veterinary in the state, works for the Department of Agriculture. Started his career out in Apex, North Carolina. Business owner. I guess you would say it's probably not necessarily politics. It's non-political, the commission seat in Apex, but you sat there for like 10 years.
It was political.
Yeah. Just go ahead and cut to the chase. Everything is at some point. Everything is at some point in time, but you went through that and then actually kind of was directly involved in some of the procedures and identification of issues facing us after 9/11. And agriculture was a highly targeted area. And some of my friends that I know in the past during that period of time was with community college, and they were talking about agriculture and how vulnerable it was. So you actually have presented to the U.S. House of Representatives on that issue and touted North Carolina's importance in that.
Sure.
We appreciate you doing that as well. I want to kind of move to a subject that I know you're aware of and I'm aware of. A California-based company called Beyond Meats is just one of them, one of the biggest plant-based meat companies that exist, has put out hamburgers that have no meat composition. So we take that in consideration, and then we look at a couple of other companies, of which we can name here, but in the interest of time, they're actually launching and doing research on producing a product from vegetables, and one of them even from using cells from animals.
That's right.
To simulate the consistency, content, and protein value of pork, chicken, and beef. Is this real? And some of the hyperbole that's coming out from the national media is prepare yourself, within 5 or 10 years, we won't need to have hogs, chickens, what have you. I mean, it's to the point that we have to kind of get to the factual world, and I'm glad to have you here today to straighten us out on this.
Well, my crystal ball is in need of refurbishing here, but I'm certainly fully aware of these efforts. And as a matter of fact, I followed Beyond Meat over the last 6 months, watched its initial offering on Wall Street and watched it quadruple in value. So someone somewhere thinks this is a viable alternative to meat.
We call that a sign.
That's right. And but in the mix of everything that's going on in our world today, the issues associated with, I put this in quotation, animal rights, and the use of critters for feed and sustenance for people all around the world. North Carolina feeds the world. We export pork, we export poultry, but there's a lot of discussion about whether this is appropriate. And of course, from my perspective, it is important. We're charged with the dominion over the animals. It's our charge to care for them, to make certain that their needs are met, and that they provide sustenance for us. But it's hard to imagine where this might go. I think the industry has not perfected techniques yet that can make a impossible burger indistinguishable from a beef patty. I don't know if that's going to be possible going forward, but if it is, there may be a market that this product has quite an appeal for. And I know some of the younger folks that I encounter talk about not eating meat, living on vegetable proteins and all vegetable diet. It's not for me, but I'm certainly not going to be critical of them if that's their choice. But I think there is a possibility that there could be some impact over the next 10 years or so to animal agriculture production.
The Impossible Meat founder, basically, Patrick Brown is the guy that founded Impossible Meats, but he's basically saying that this is a major paradigm shift. This is something that is going to literally kind of tilt the whole industry on its side, so to speak, and change the dynamic of everything. And you just mentioned one of the things that is concerning a lot of folks that is in the industry as it is now is that whole export process.
Right.
We derive so much from exporting meat to China and other places, and of course I noticed just recently we're now importing dogs to the United States. So that's a whole nother issue that I'm just
last night
wrap my head around that. Yeah. So, but that is a serious issue. Is there the potential from what you've seen? Scientifically, apparently, there's some relation because we've had people just recently that's done the quote taste test and they're saying it's here, consistency. But I'm looking at the financial issue. Is the production of that kind of product anywhere as financially reasonable as what we're doing now with livestock?
No. But again, if we how can mass production create a market, mass produce these products? Is there that potential? I can't say for sure, but I do know that in a recent story in Atlantic Magazine about fake meat, and I use that term because that's the correct term.
Right.
Chicken McNuggets were provided the author of the story. He found them delightful in taste and texture, but each one cost $100. So exactly. I would have to believe that those are cost prohibitive for most folk. And but as we move forward, and I think the other piece of this that there's not a clear understanding is there is a potential for the need for genetic modification in some of these products to get where consumer will accept it, and there's so much pushback on genetically modified products that may throw a wrench in these works as well.
And the big thing I think that was touted as well is when we look at this industry, and we're looking at 182 million right now that Impossible Foods is talking about, and there's like 4 or 5 other companies that's jumping on this bandwagon. But the other part of that is the advantage of being able to feed, quote, as you mentioned a while ago, the world maybe in a much more expedient way and that kind of thing. But again, it's an industry that will be built. The question is, what time period are we looking at, and is it 5 year, 10 years?
Sure.
I guess it depends on whose agenda you look at being pushing that.
Right, and consumer acceptance. If they can create a product that's widely accepted by the consumer, and obviously that will they will move forward that much more rapidly. But that remains to be seen.
I don't want to take up all the time just with things, agendas that I've got. I want to take the time, if I can, for the rest of the show, for you to kind of talk about things that you see on the horizon now as challenges for our livestock poultry industry here in North Carolina, and from your experience and background, not only in D.C., but on a national level. What does folks need to know and understand that is somewhat fact-based? We get so much from the various media sources now, Facebook and others, that not only do we need to fact check, but it's sometimes laughable. So kind of dial us into some of the challenges we're going to be looking at.
Well, as we all know, animal agriculture has been under criticism for recently, and more than that, with for impacts to the environment, for the animal welfare issues, and every now and then I get to be a part of something in this job that is way out into the future and exciting, and that happened to me just 2 weeks ago. I visited a site that's harvesting methane gas from a hog lagoon and piping the gas to engines that run and drive a turbine to create steam to generate electricity that's fed back into the grid. And so we've eliminated the release of all methane gas from a lagoon and made energy from it. We've better managed the solids in the lagoon, and I think there's a huge potential that's beginning to unfold in some of these advanced technologies that will allow us to address what I believe are the greatest concerns associated with animal agriculture, and that is waste and animal mortality. And both of these matters can be managed in some of these new technologies that are going to be available. And I think I will say that there's a concern that every time an incident of some consequence comes to pass, most recently Hurricane Florence, the criticism of hog lagoons flooding eastern North Carolina, it simply was not the case.
It didn't happen.
We have 3,300 hog lagoons in the state of North Carolina. Less than 35 of them were damaged to any meaningful extent in the state of North Carolina, and only one fully breached. One lagoon out of 3,300 was compromised.
I think if you look at the percentages, that's a huge plus.
It is, and yet little mention is made of the 121 million gallons of municipal untreated and raw sewage that was dumped into the waterways of North Carolina. Absolutely. So,
and often that's on a regular basis.
That is on a regular basis. So we have to make sure that we tell the story. That's our greatest shortcoming in agriculture. We never tell our story. Folks in this profession, this vocation, are humble folk that go about their jobs every day without complaint and do what needs to be done to get the job done. But we need to have folks like you telling the story, and that's what this is about.
And I think that's what we're here for. And whether it's wild pigs or whether it's setting the scale straight on what really is happening, we've got folks like you and Steve Troxler and others that are welcome and will continue to be welcome here. So you may have a future in broadcast as a specialty person when you get ready to retire, to come in and do nothing but talk about ag. How about that?
I can do that.
Might just go ahead and give you a nameplate. Say, okay, you got a place here that we can do this. Yeah. This is something I'd like to kind of publicly invite you back as you see things open up. that we need to address and we need to look at. But I do appreciate your time with everything that's going on in North Carolina and with all the footsteps you make. Getting you here to sit down and talk to folks in this area is huge, and we do appreciate
Thanks
that.
for the opportunity. I appreciate
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us today, and also remind you each and every Tuesday at 2:30 We Should Know is on the air. If you have a friend or somebody who wants to go to YouTube, pull up some of these shows and look at them, you're welcome to do that. Also, you continue to send us emails at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. See you again next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.